Today's topic is success isn't the absence of negativity. And in this topic, negative bias plays a big part. What is negative bias? Basically, it is the fact that humans pay greater importance to events of a negative instead of a positive nature. For example, you've probably got more memories of a child falling out of the tree than the times you were laughing with your friend in the treehouse. But this bias can have a limiting impact on our professional success. If we don't understand it and challenge it, everyone successful has faced a lot of negativity and then has overcome it, but often these negative stories don't get spoken about. So in this episode, I'd like for a couple of us or each of us to share a story, a negative story that had a substantial limitation on our progress, and then how we've overcome it. Now I'm going to kick this off. Now, I don't want to go into the story's depth. I just want to cover the story. We may cover it more at another time, but it was just the biggest limiting negative experience of my life. So nearly 6 years ago, I lost my son. He was nearly 4 years old. It was shock. It was not expected. Perfectly healthy kid that caught something, and then 2 weeks later, he was gone. Now, while there's trauma on that, I don't want to actually talk about trauma today. I want to talk about that negative experience and then how that had an impact. It was the ongoing fact of feeling like a failure and not wanting to or feeling deserving of success. When a lot of us in business may not have something that serious, but may have faced a little failure along the way. Maybe poor finances, maybe not actually being where you expect to be. All these things are negative, and the problem is our mind stays focused on that. So mine was so harsh that it literally took me 4.5 years to even contemplate wanting to feel good or wanting to be successful. And I was a business owner through all of this. This struck within year 4 or 5 of my business. So this is right in the middle of it. It was rough, and I'm going to go into some more practical things I learned along the way, because I want us to ask other questions as we keep going. And the next thing I would probably like to cover is like what I actually did and what I found, because I literally have only been on, I feel like, this road to next steps in the last 18 months, I would say, is when I've really felt it. So things that I found to actually start overcoming this, trying to combat what negativity was actually doing. So when you've experienced something negative in your life, something big, you become naturally more risk adverse. Okay. So as a father, I would start fearing heights. It was really weird. Like I would climb to a tower and I'd feel nervous on heights when I'd never felt a fear of heights before this experience. So you can imagine how that played an effect on my business life. Okay, business does require being risk adverse, but at the same time, it requires you actually taking risk. No one has ever achieved anything successful in business without taking a risk. So that was something that I really found difficult, that I couldn't understand at the time, but now being on, I guess, a better side of things, I can really see that that was a big part of it. And also being locked down, not wanting that. I didn't talk about my story. I never told anyone about it. I was trying to put up this fake wall, of a happy person with nothing going wrong in his life, and also never had anything go wrong. Because it feels like in business, like when you go to like a networking group or something like that, or anything, people want to hear about positive things. It's like case studies and marketing. It's all about happy, win, win, win. I guess like they're just the things that I found that I guess had an impact. That was the effect of having that negativity on my life.
What would you invite somebody who is in that negative space to? What steps would you invite them to take?
It was really good because, like, as I said, I feel like it's only relatively recently that I've started moving out, and one of them was literally just opening up more. I feel like there's, it's kind of like the stages of anything. Like acceptance has to eventually come, and even just talking about it. The reason I feel like it opened up a lot recently was actually before I met Matt, but who I met Matt through was someone that said you should share your story. It is part of who you are, and it's important. And I read something online recently that I wanted to share. It actually said, tell your story. Okay, like be vulnerable, tell your story, because not only is it who you are, But when you tell your whole story, so not just your negative story, like don't just go up to someone and tell your negative story. Sometimes you feel you have to do that when it's raw, but like when you're sort of got a scar instead of an open wound, tell your entire story, because the benefit of that is you'll probably have some positive things in your life. You know, there's positive things that have happened. And when you tell your entire story, you start to reflect on more than just that gaping hole in your life, that very negative thing. And this, mine's a very harsh story, but let's say that you had bankruptcy, okay, in your past or something like that. If you tell your entire business story, it is more than that. Yet our mind focused to that. So if you tell your entire story, it naturally opens up more, and you'll find and you'll become more positive as well.
But it does depend on obviously whereabouts on that journey that you are, right? But to be able to reflect, I've found some of the things that have happened in my life nowhere near as horrific, in my opinion, as what you've gone through, Tony. But you know, for me, that constant, I know it sounds cliche, but that constant gratitude, which I always do every morning, my gratitude, just that reminder of programming that, but also being able to be an observer on the artifacts more than just the negative, making that one of the artifacts of many, and looking at what the puzzle makes, because these things reveal a lot about us. And I often find myself that when I look back at these horrific things, I've come through them, I've survived, and actually they've made me the person I am today. And I've actually given me so much gratitude, and I've learned so many amazing lessons. And the things that I've achieved would have never been possible if I hadn't gone through that pain. And yeah, there's some pretty horrific pain from being sued for $20 million in the Supreme Court of Australia for something that I didn't do. And I had to pay $40,000 to the Silks to actually get me off. And the day of my court case, the guy prosecuting me was found dead in a hotel room. It was with cocaine and hookers and stuff. This is like, couldn't read about this sort of stuff. But I still had to go through that, potentially losing everything I own for something that was completely false that I hadn't even done. But it's quite interesting going through that and coming through that. You know, how I learned to deal about sitting in that situation helps me now as I go forward by looking backward at the process I was going through. And I guess you're reflecting on that too, Tony, and you being able to reflect on that from how that artifact has helped you develop and what you've come through is a really super powerful lesson, because like things I've gone through are nowhere near on the scale of what you have, but you give me a lot of courage just to be able to go, well, look, if Tony's gone through that, and look, I know from my own lessons, it's, look, this journey of life is a history book that's unfolding, but to be able to keep going back and looking in the pages tells us so much about our future. If we can actually bother to do that, rather than being so caught up in the moment, being able to reflect on that, I find really powerful. And when I meditate or whatever, it's this ability to have that space to be able to sort of look at the artifacts, look at that murder board of what are all the pieces telling me here. I know this one's shining really bright right now, but at least that's the way I look at it. And so that helps me get through these things when my programming tells me this is really bad. My brain these days is like, well, how do I know what's on the other side of this isn't something really amazing? You know, one of my great friends, Chris Gall, he went home one night when he was, I think, 20, and he went into his house, sat down with his girlfriend. He remembers his window getting blown out, and a guy walked in the back of the house, shot her father through the head, shot her other sister through the head, came in, broke the door down, killed his girlfriend in front of him, and then shot him in the face with a shotgun. And he survived. And through that terrific thing where 3 people were killed and he survived, and he still had a quarter of his face blown off, he became one of the top people at Victims of Crimes Compensation in New South Wales and helped Ebony Simpson and all these horrific murders. He's there. I went with him for his court case, and it was just a horrific time. But he's come out of that. He was a plumber at the time, and now he's a counsellor. And it's just such an incredible gift that he's got to help these people come through trauma. And that's one, you know, reflection that I have about watching Chris go through that as my mate and come through that. It was just so powerful to see what he's doing now and the impact he's having on other people.
Yeah, I think it's not till you get to this stage, because at the time you don't even want help. Like when it's really at the start. Like, so this, I feel right now, is for people that, you know, depending on how severe it is, they're at the stage where they're not wanting to like be super negative, but now that negative is making impact. And it's the ability that you need to start finding people that have substance. I think that's what makes a big difference. So like, this is what I like about the people that I've met, because I've opened up and said, I guess, what happened to me. There's so many people that have got a story. You know what I mean? So many people. I don't care if it's more, worse, or anything. If someone's 10 out of 10 is their 10 out of 10. Okay? There's no such thing as like, this isn't a traumatic experience. Whatever is your 10 out of 10 is a 10 out of 10. Once you start finding others, especially when you're at that right mental stage to start wanting to dig yourself out of that hole, you do need to open up, and you do need to find other stories to, I guess, find inspiring, and also not feel like the weirdo, because sometimes you want to talk about the bad. You want to talk about your story. And if someone hears that and then just goes like, this guy's a freak, or maybe you should see some counseling, or maybe you should take some pills, it's like, no, I was just trying to open up. Like people that have gone through crap get it, and you can talk crazy with them, and that's very therapeutic.
Completely agree. And I think there's this piece in what you were saying, which kind of reminds me of this loop. You sort of end up going in a loop, right? In your head, and you kind of reinforce that negativity. This is what happened to me. This is what happened to me. Can I tell you? This is what happened to me. That sort of the negative spiral that then continues to happen because there's a reinforcement of it, but the trigger remains the same. And the trigger remains this negative feeling that is making you do something, making you behave a particular way, making you feel unhappy. And the moment that you can step away from that trigger, and it may take years, it may take months, it may take a moment, but the moment that you step away from the trigger and are able to observe the trigger and, the triggered, and to untouch them, and the moment that you say, this was the trigger, this is the learning, and then what you end up doing is the learning itself becomes its own trophy, right? It's like, I did it. This is what I learned. This is what I got. This is what I take away. And then this
So
learning
powerful.
becomes
Yeah,
it just gives us so much more reflection and context and other people who understand it. And it's the de-triggering process, just to add one little bit more, is an emotional process. These are the moments where we haven't yet called out an emotion. We haven't yet said this is wrong to us. We haven't yet recognized the power of the lock and key. It's locked in. You have to unlock it. And the moment that you unlock it, you then get the learning as a gift.
that's so powerful. Yeah, that's amazing.
So Tony,
yeah,
your friend network at the time when this happened, was it something that held together? Was it something that fragmented? Was it something that you're still in contact with a lot of the people that you were at that time?
I would say
What
almost
happened there?
none from that time, because it was a very different network. I didn't have much of a business network, and even that took a hard hit. Like, I'm sure there's some that are probably yelling at me, "What are you talking about, man? I'm still friends with you." But like in general, I went through a lot, and a lot of people struggle. So let's say you suffer, like, this is more of a topic on trauma, but like when you suffer trauma, there's a group of people that don't want to associate with that just because of fear or something like that. They will naturally pull away because of how they can't cope with being around that in their life.
Well, Tony, that's usually what you've just said is the biggest fear for most partners. Most husbands or wives to lose a child is their fear, their biggest fear, and how to handle that. So, how did you want to be helped? I guess what did you need at that time?
You don't need a fix, all right? So like we're getting like slightly into a different topic here, but like there's something about Australian people that like to fix problems, and we're not just talking about men. I know us, we all like to fix it when our wives or partners have something, we try and fix it. But I'm just talking about people in general. It's either trying to distract you with something positive. So someone asks you that, like, talk to me, like, so you either try and avoid talking about it, then someone forces you to, and then it's just a bad experience because they're not equipped to, and they think they're trying to help. I do feel a lot of people try and help, but to be fair, they're just rubbish at it. And yeah, it's just a fact. Like, unless, and even myself, like, I'm not able to be a good person. I feel like I'm not going to say the perfect thing to everyone going through something, but the second you are talking to someone that has gone through something even if it's not exactly the same, just something where you go, I respect that, you're not judging me. There's this amount of judge for when you open up in some circles, okay? Where if you're in a circle of understanding and just true empathy, not sympathy. Sympathy is very different to empathy. And there's a good video I watched on YouTube that really explains it, because what some people consider being empathetic, they're just being bad. But showing sympathy really makes you feel shitty when you're feeling shitty, okay? It does not make you feel better.
There's this thing about trauma that's polarizing. If one has gone through a trauma and you're expressing it to somebody and that person has never been through it before, it's polarizing. It may be that their neurons have already fired that way, and therefore it brings you even closer, because it's like neurons that fire together stay together. It's the fact that those emotional neurons, these emotional experiences, the neurology behind the trauma actually has its own context. It's like, have you passed the grade of and ... Has this been an experience in your life? Has that level of trauma, whether it is a 10 out of 10 for you, for Finn, for Matt, for anyone, have you been through something like that you can understand and emote the empathy that is required to give that space, time?
Yeah, there's a big misgiving between sympathy and empathy, and I don't think a lot of people do understand it. And so it's hard to empathize if you haven't got that experience. And so it's part of the polarization might be that I don't know how to deal with this. I'll either try and fix it or I'm going to try and run away from it. And it's really quite interesting. But I can hear what you're saying, Tony. Or at least my interpretation is when people are trying to fix it and they can't properly empathize with your position because they haven't gone through something, it actually creates more turmoil for you.
Yeah.
And so therefore, to go through something like that, it's much better if you look for someone who can empathize with it properly.
That's it. You get a whole new perspective. So we've all seen those pictures that if you look at it this way, you see one face, you turn around, you see something totally different. If someone doesn't have that perspective, how are they possibly going to help? Because all they're seeing is that picture when you see this picture, and both of you are correct. Okay, so no one's wrong. It's just that you need to understand that if you're going to take advice or give advice, make sure you're coming from the right perspective. Like the only time you want someone else's perspective is in a different scenario where you actually want.
So how do you find that, Tony? How do you find it?
You need to open up your network. Okay, a lot of this is just the nature of people, is we find these very tight groups. Whether it's like same culture, all the people from a certain country and race or religion all stick to their one group. But even within that group, there's going to be people that have had different perspectives. But the thing is, if you don't actually open up, so it's one thing if it's public, but if it's private and no one knows it, how are you ever going to find someone with that similar perspective? If I never told you guys what happened to me, you would never have any. It's not like there's a sign that follows me, so you wouldn't know.
But to open up your networks, if you're in the middle of this, what would be your steps to go and look for groups that relate to that?
I mean, I never went to any counseling groups or anything like that, or parents. Like, I never did any of that. Probably because when I was recommended to do it, I wasn't in the mindset for it. But at the same time, I don't really find a lot of comfort in finding people with the exact same story. Like Matt was once at a networking group and he just told his story. All I heard was that guy's crazy enough that I can open up and we can have a good open conversation about anything. You don't have to give your whole story. Like I could literally, what I say to people when I meet them is, they want to know about me. You meet someone, you get introduced, and I go, listen, I had something very traumatic happen 5 years ago. It's almost a test, okay? Because if they go, do you mind? I would like to know. Then that's someone naturally, if someone is willing to ask on that, usually they've probably got a bit of a story. If someone tells me they suffered trauma, I'll go, are you comfortable sharing? Because I've experienced trauma and I think it's always, healthy to share. Okay, so I would always say put out a little story or whatever, just to test the waters, because it's kind of like a secret handshake. It's just a way for someone to know that I can open up at the same time that you can open up.
It got me thinking.
Yeah.
Do you feel that trauma helps to make a better leader? If so, how?
I am better leader now for it. I think I was always going to make a good leader. Am I a better leader from what I've experienced? Yes, but is it necessary? No. Okay, I really wouldn't wish this upon anyone. I would have much rather find something else to use as my way of, just being a good person that can be empathetic. You know what I mean?
Finn,
Yeah.
what about you?
I absolutely 100% believe that pain is one of the best teachers because it forces change. It's a state where your fight or flight kicks in. You start looking for things that you wouldn't typically look for. You start, as soon as your periphery opens up to different types of things, you've put yourself into a different state. It causes a different state, whereas you're trying and remaining into a state. So pain, I can't talk to whether it's trauma pain on the same level, and I know it's not a competition, but for me, the harnessing and understanding that pain is one of the best catalysts for change is, for me, really powerful. And I think going through that has helped me become a better leader, because it's helped me a lot in understanding how to simplify things and sit in and understand when I'm going through that looking for the opportunity that's going to get me out of it. Look, I think it has, because it's part of my story. It's part of my history. And I've had lots of pain. People don't know that. They don't think about it because they just look at me because I'm always happy. But I'm always happy because I've been through a lot of pain. It's like when I went to India and I see all these people that are poor and they're really happy. And then I fly back to Los Angeles and I'm in a hotel and everyone's sort of, moping around, whinging because their nail salon's not working. It's really interesting. I think it really is a really powerful state if you know how to, especially if you know how to sort of navigate your way through it.
Yeah, I think it's really true. I've got a theory. I've got nothing to back this up but my own experience. And that is that pretty much everybody I've ever met that's been through childhood trauma is really, really good in a crunch. They have a more, not an understanding, but the way that they work. Like, I'm really, really good in a crisis. I'm really, really good when it comes to a lot of things happening really quickly and everything seems to slow down. I'm not really good day to day. And I've found that with a lot of people that have experienced sort of childhood trauma, because you're trained to work things out, to understand what, to be ready for something at all times. So your brain is trained. And then when it comes into an issue or a problem, and I've found a lot of, obviously not all, but I found a lot of paramedics and firemen and ambulance workers and all those, they usually have got some sort of trauma background where they've had it for a long period of time. So when it comes down to it, they know what they're doing. And again, I've got nothing to back that up except my own experience.
There's something about being able to move, even though one is going through trauma. It sort of reminds me of fight, freeze, right? It's that sort of, do I run away from this? Do I sit there and do something about it? What am I going to do, right? And I think that this gets the cogs moving a bit. It's like, you know what? I'm in that state. That's okay. Let's call it out. This is what's happening. Step away, expand. There's moments where, I don't know why it's come to my mind, but like bladder trauma, when you really need to go, and your bladder just has to expand. It has nothing else to do apart from has to expand. It doesn't, retract back, which can be an issue, but it expands, it creates more space.
It's a bit like going to the gym, right? You're building muscle. And so I've consulted on some pretty major crisis jobs. I had a crisis consulting business. We worked with two of the biggest churches in Australia on a massive crisis job where everyone ran away. We worked them for about 6 months on actually rebuilding this organization, and we did it and got through the whole thing. And it was traumatic time, but I found that the lessons of the past really helped those go through it. And it's sort of like, because you've built the muscles to deal with it, you can recognize it. So going through it, it's easy to listen to someone on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube going, oh yeah, we'll just deal with your trauma. But from my experience is, you've got to go through it. You've got to get the pain. The second time you go through it, you get a little bit better at it. You're not going to actually experience it from listening to me tell you about it, but by going through it a number of times and experiencing it, and then reflecting back when you're in a period of not pain, it helps you construct the actual puzzle of life to go, you know what, next time I'm going through that, and this is exactly what I did, when I had some dramas with certain things and one of my startups, that went horrifically wrong. I could reflect back and go, how did I get through this? Okay, I do this, I do that, I do that. Let's navigate through that. And I had more of a war room mentality around, let's be logical, not emotional about it, and let's put the pieces in place and help take me out of this sort of mud. And I could have only done that by going through it myself. Some course, I'm not a guy that would go to a course and learn about pain. It was something I had to experience, but that reflection in a period when I'm not in pain really helped me.
Power in reflection, the power in putting something into context, the power in being able to take away something. And when it happens again, if it happens again, these are my learnings. And I think that reflective consciousness is the toolkit.
We got to wrap up. Maybe just a final comment. The topic was, success isn't the absence of negativity. Now, I've got a better understanding that those that have success have faced negativity. Is there any final comments on that, Tia?
Yeah, totally de-trigger, right? Like the trigger and the triggered. There is an incredible moment where you can sort of untouch and like become a bit more free. Like the parachute and you are now allowed to sort of put into context what you would like to save and what you would like to let go of. Awesome.
Matt?
Experience comes from all different sources, and you don't know until you open up to people what sort of experiences they've had that might be able to help. So be vulnerable a little bit and go out there, and when you're ready, ask for help, because it's the best thing you can do in regards to those people connecting with you, because people love to help good people.
Nice little plug for next week too. And Finn?
Success is the product of understanding negativity. When you can reflect and see what that negativity is and see it through a different lens of positivity, I place it into a space and understand how to harness the power of that negativity, that's what drives success.